Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm Farrukh Pitafi. Usually, viewers, Sana Maqbool actually hosts this program, but today she is not here, so I'm going to host the program. I'm going to fill in for her. Today, we have a very loaded list of topics. We have more than 2 topics. Usually, we handle 2. Today, we are going to discuss 3. First of all, you must have seen the cable car debacle in Budgaram, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where young students were stranded because of a snapped wire, and rescue efforts have continued. We are going to talk about that. So far, we have seen that 5 children have been rescued thanks to our valiant forces, especially our Pakistan Army and their efforts to rescue kids that have been going on throughout the day, and they continue during the night as well. The second topic is regarding war on terror. War on terror is important because for 20 years we have been fighting and trying to defeat terrorism, and it continued for quite some time. Then we saw a resurgence of this menace in past 2 years, and while it was resurgent, we have seen fresh operations that took place. Yesterday we also saw that there was, in North Waziristan, there was an operation, and 6 sons of the soil have embraced Shahadat. They have been, martyred. But that operation was successful, and the war on terror continues unabated. We have to know what exactly is the tally right now, what exactly is the state of affairs. We are going to deliberate on that. The third one is regarding Ukraine Russia war, and we have heard that Denmark and Netherlands are going to contribute a huge number of helicopters, not helicopters, F-16s to Ukraine, and we have to actually look into that as well, how that might actually change the dynamics of the war and whether there is any end to this war at all. In order to help us understand these issues in the studio, I'm joined by my friend, my colleague, Raja Faisal. Thank you very much, Raja, for being part of the program. And online, we are joined by Brigadier Retired Raashid Wali Janjua. And before we talk about foreign terror, Brigadier Sal, let us talk about Budgaram and the rescue efforts. Your comment on the state of affairs there, sir.
This has been a very busy day because it all started at 7:45 and 11:40 helicopters were in the air. That was the most prompt action by Army Aviation, and they set about reconnaissance right away. It was a difficult situation because 2 cables of steel wire rope had already collapsed. Third was just dangling. There was a sag. The inmates were distressed, and in such environments, the most important thing in sling operations is the site restrictions, the pilot's expertise, because he has to keep the platform stable so that there are no oscillations, and not everybody can do. It requires special expertise, and since our Army Aviation pilots have been operating on those icy heights of Siachen also, so they have good experience of sling operations. Then the machine itself, it has to have the right equipment, and the wind and the weather is the third variable.
Right.
The fourth
Brigadier sir, while listening to the commentary that was coming on, one felt that the experts' views were divided. On one side, we kept on hearing people saying that we don't have big choppers like Chinook. On the other side, there were others who kept on saying that here, because of maneuvering and hovering, it is important that there should be a small helicopter. What is your take on that, sir?
I think we have the right platforms. For this you require a platform that has autopilot and which is fairly stable. We have Bell 142, we have Pumas, and that was not the shortcoming. In fact, the situation was difficult because of the site restrictions and the kind of rescue it was, because it has to be done very precisely, taking all due precautions, eliminating even the minimal risk factor. So they went about, they re-victualled the inmates. They were in distress, and having got the logistic sustenance, their morale also was boosted. And then all aspects were seen, because you would have observed that there was a wind velocity which was swaying the slings, and anything could have gone wrong had it been unnecessarily and hastened. Due precautions were taken, other options were also laid on the table. There are experts in northern area which operate these pulleys, and those experts were pressed into service. They were flown in, and through SSG, Army Aviation, and those mechanical experts, a small pulley which could carry only a small, that was also, so a kind of a hybrid innovative approach was also used. So all options were on the table, because if the sling operations fail, even the harnessing doesn't work, you could have gone through a smaller pulley, and ultimately that's been done that way. And 5 inmates have been rescued. So this is a great success under these trying environments.
Absolutely, and we are grateful for that, Brigadier Saab. I'm going to come back to you, but before that, let me bring in Raja Faisal as well. Raja, your take on this.
Yeah, Farrukh, it was of course a very important and prompt action which we saw today. But the thing which was extremely important was that the obviously the heli team, they even had to look at the situation in a way that there was only one string with which the obviously the bogie was hanging, and they had to make sure that some kind of stress is not given to that string, with obviously the choppers when they are on top. They had to keep a safe distance with which they can operate. They were not supposed to get too close to it, because if they get too close to it, of course it would have created a sort of havoc for that bogie, with which of course we saw that all of the students, they were inside, 2 of their teachers, they were inside. So they had to make it was a mammoth task. The way it has been conducted with the full cautiousness, I think the credit goes to the Pak Army.
Absolutely, that does, and we are, we keep on talking about that, and it is important to remember who are the heroes right now. But what would you say about the dilapidated state of infrastructure that children had to go through this, horrendous experience? Not only that, but it was a daily affair that they had to resort to these cable cars to go to the school and come back.
Exactly, and Farrukh, this is a very important thing which you are highlighting right now. And if we go through the Twitter statement which came out from the Premier Office, Interim Prime Minister, he categorically highlighted that we even need to check in whether all of these chairlifts, they are following the conduct the way they should be doing it or not, and whether the health and safety is being assured by all of these chairlift operators. If not, then of course government should take an action against them, and I think this is quite
not only
positive.
that, but there should be some better way to
way, and connectivity is the problem. And we know, all of these students, I mean, by the way, 3 of the students, they were awaiting their results, and they got their results of 9th class while they were in the bogie.
And I kept on looking at the results. Somehow, media didn't understand that there has to be privacy, and they just started offloading the results on television. I don't think that is how they would have actually hoped to get their results. But let us now shift gear and focus on war and terror.
Yeah.
Brigadier Saab, let me come back to you. Today we saw that 6 soldiers were martyred, terrorists were killed, and the war and terror continues. But sir, do we have any timeline in mind, and why is it that terrorism is resurgent? We asked this question repeatedly, but it is an important question, isn't it not?
So even at the cost of repetition, let's recap. Resurgence is a consequence of the breathing space that the terrorists have got because of the negotiations that were done last year, and they got a free pass to re-enter these areas and re-establish their sanctuaries. Then the population, which was earlier quite wary of them, it became further fearful, because once the population sees that those elements, they are coming back again, and might be they have had an arrangement with the law enforcement agencies, so let's cooperate with them, because if we do not, law enforcement agencies will not come to our rescue, rather these people would harm us. So like in a classic counter-insurgency operation, we like to drain the swamp. Here the swamp is the public support. So how can you drain once the public, instead of being fully on board, starts getting fearful, and out of that fear, sanctuaries that are provided so they can merge in the population, and from there they can stage these operations. And we also need to understand that this is a proxy warfare, and these are the terrorist proxies, which a war has been imposed as per a strategy by Ajit Doval, who very clearly enunciated this strategy some years ago. And now this is the practical manifestation of that, to damage Pakistan by bleeding through 1,000 cuts. So this is what is being done. There is a proxy warfare, space was provided to them, and now these areas where each and every foot was liberated and each and every foot was sanitized of the presence of terrorists through the blood of armed forces martyrs. Again, we have to sanitize. Situation is not as bad as it was in 2010, but still they have the capability to mount these sudden attacks, and for that, intelligence-based operations have to be very, very strong, and we have to develop some kind of a robust local intelligence capability as well, and somehow reassure the tribes and the population that they should deny sanctuaries and provide the right intelligence so that they do not free.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point, Brigadier Saab, and I'm going to come back to you regarding especially fighting terrorism, apart from kinetic operations as well. But Faisal, there's one thing that actually bears reminding, and that is during the war on terror, especially in 2014, the entire country came together and we cobbled together a national action plan. There were many important, aspects to it, of course. On one side, there were, hanging or death penalty for terrorists and military courts. But then we also had this resolve that we are going to fight radicalism, by de-radicalizing the society. And there were many aspects, madrasa reforms, what else, FATA reforms and so much. Why is it that after, climbing, this hill, we keep on actually sliding down, and suddenly a government comes and it very quickly tries to concede a lot of ground to terrorists, and then once again it becomes a resurgent problem?
Yeah, Farrukh, that's a very obviously important point that you are highlighting. All we can say is that the previous government, I think previous government's assessment about it, it was very wrong. Right after the pullout of US from the region, from Afghanistan itself, and Taliban taking over, suddenly there was a sort of perception within the previous government that we might be able to, get peace with the negotiations with help of Taliban, which we are not seeing it anymore.
Yeah, but
we still
hang on. But how many times does it take for a message to sink in? Every time you cut a deal with TTP, for that matter, it always came back to haunt us. Start from Shakai, Sararoga, Sawat, and repeatedly in 2014 also. Before that, we were negotiating with TTP. Then they attacked our schools, killed our children. Why is it that we don't understand this basic fact that no matter how much you engage in dialogue, in the end, they will only get more time to regroup and then attack us again.
And Farrukh, it is not about regrouping anymore, because we know that there are factions within the TTP. If there are a few factions who might be able to talk with us or who might be willing to talk to us, then majority of them, of course, they are not willing to talk.
But why do we keep confusing ourselves that there are many groups?
Exactly.
The fact is that there is a body of terrorists that keeps on attacking this country.
Exactly. But Farrukh's most important thing which we need to look at right now is, of course, these are the very Taliban who, Pakistani Taliban, who had good relations with the TTA, Taliban from Afghanistan. So now they are in a government, and obviously all of them, they are residing within Afghanistan, and all of the activities which are taking place in Pakistan, they are being facilitated within Afghanistan. Yeah. So now it is more of a talking to a government as well, which is a regime, a proper regime.
But in the end, what you are saying is, what you are saying is that now the tail is wagging the dog. Let me very quickly go back to Brigadier Saab regarding National Action Plan. When we were expecting that we are going to have a National Action Plan 2.0, we saw that we have actually ended up compromising some of the major progress or developments that we had already made in fight against terrorism. Why would that be?
So we have not done a very good job of implementing NAP points, and what was most vital in these newly merged districts, we should have anticipated that once we finish this centuries-old frontier times regulation and the system which was in place, the PA system, there would be a vacuum. There would be a governance deficit, and that vacuum will be filled by crime gangs and terrorist elements. No police capability was built to take over the area. The judiciary reforms were not undertaken, and still the judicial arm of the state is not there. Its reach is minimal in these newly merged districts. So in the absence of the government writ, which is established through district administration, through police, an effective police, a good legal system, what do you expect will happen there? So, and the army was also pulled because there were compulsions elsewhere, and once army is pulled, the vacuum is again filled because there is nothing on the civilian front to take over. Out of 110 billion rupees that were promised out of CCI's share, NFC's share, only 38 billion were released. So that's a pittance. Where has the rest of the money gone? And whatever has been released, where has that been spent? There are still clamors by people that despite the rebuilding efforts by army also, by the civilian component.
Absolutely. Brigadier Saab, very quickly, do you think that there is need for accountability in the way we have handled National Action Plan in past 4 or 5 years, and especially how war and terror was reversed, their gains were reversed?
Of course, there is a need for accountability. Accountability in any case should be done, and it should be a continual, reassessment and reappraisal. More than that, there should be a consistency. If you follow consistent policies, then the people also get reassured and the policies themselves get strength. Because if the policies keep changing and there's no clarity, so that ambivalence is exploited by these non-state actors.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Brigadier retired Raashid Wali, Janjua, Director, Research, IPRI. Thank you very much for your precious time. Viewers, you have listened to our participants, and of course, in the war on terror, there are many questions that need to be answered, especially because these soldiers who are martyred today, the 6 souls that we lost today to the good fight, they are children of this nation. And how many people are we going to lose further? And why is it that any politician who comes in can reverse the momentum of war and terror? That is something that we have to contend with. But let us now talk about the other topic that is very important, the Ukraine war. And it is important because there seems to be a change of dynamic now, with 40 plus F-16s promised to Ukraine by these 2 countries that I mentioned. We have to see how it changes the direction of war and terror. And in order to help us understand that this issue, we are joined also by Tom O'Connor, Senior Foreign Policy Writer at Newsweek. I have welcomed him. Thank you very much, Tom, for joining. And let me now, okay, I'm told that we are still waiting for him to join, but there is a package that we have prepared for you. First watch that, then we are going to talk about this issue.
During the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visit to Netherlands on August 20, the prime ministers of the 2 NATO nations stated that the Netherlands and Denmark will provide F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine, with the first delivery scheduled for around the time of New Year. The Ukrainian president hailed the decision by the Netherlands and Denmark to give his country F-16 fighter jets as historic and aspirational. The pledge, which comes a few days after the United States gave its approval for the 2 countries to potentially provide the fighter jets, is the first firm commitment of F-16s for the Ukrainian armed forces. Ministers from both nations who are in charge of the global alliance to assist Ukraine in acquiring the aircraft expressed gratitude to Washington for the approval. Sources claim that Denmark intends to give Ukraine 19 F-16s, with the pilot training already underway. By year's end, the first jets are anticipated to arrive. Despite there not yet have been an agreement on the precise number, the Netherlands claimed to have 42 F-16s available. Both allies are transitioning to more advanced 5th generation fighter jets for their fleets. The approval of requests, according to the Secretary of State Antony Blinken, would enable Ukraine to fully utilize its new capabilities as soon as the first group of pilots complete their training, Blinken said in an assurance letter to Denmark and the Netherlands. It is uncertain, though, if the US permission may now trigger an acceleration. Currently, Ukraine has a tiny air force built on Soviet-era aircraft, but it cannot compete with Russia's stronger air force. Due to its small size, it is only able to complete a few sorties per day and finds it difficult to challenge Russian domination of the airspace immediately adjacent to the front line. According to analysts, the West's plan to give Ukraine F-16s is meant to strengthen its long-term ability to thwart Russian onslaught. However, Russian Ambassador Vladimir Babin said in a statement on 21st August that the decision by Denmark and the Netherlands to donate the first F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine would only escalate the conflict. During the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky
package, you have seen the package. Now let me once again try to welcome Tom O'Connor, Senior Foreign Policy Writer at Newsweek. Tom, thank you very much for joining us.
The Ukrainian president hailed the decision by the Netherlands and Denmark to give his
Can you hear me, Tom?
Yes, apparently the audio is a little poor. I can hear you.
Right. This new development, how does it change the direction of war? Do you think that it is going to change the momentum in favor of Ukraine, or even despite this many F-16s, Russia has an upper hand?
Sure. Well, I think that the F-16 certainly have the potential to shift the dynamic of the conflict, where we haven't seen a large presence of Ukrainian Air Force, except perhaps in the very beginning stages of the conflict. At the same time, we do have to remember that timeline is an issue here. The idea that Ukraine may be getting these jets a little sooner than the U.S. procured one, I'm sure elicits some hope in Kiev. But logistics, shipping, a lot of maintenance and parts, they still are serious issues that the Ukrainians have to overcome in taking these things. And at the same time, given the fact that Russians may have struggled in dealing with drone strikes from Ukraine, but that F-16s and these aircraft are a lot more of an attractive target, for these traditional Russian defense systems, I think that Ukrainians, even once they get these jets, will be quite conservative in using them. So I think it really stands to see how exactly they will use this in concert with their current strategy, and whether that will be something that could perhaps push the Russians back.
Yeah, Tom, that is quite interesting, aspect which you are highlighting. And there is another challenge, and that is of course, it is being said by the Ukrainian Air Force spokesperson. He is to believe that, of course, it would still take the winter and the autumn. They have to obviously continue without the F-16s. Still, we won't see F-16s just because of one reason, that they have to go through a process of obviously training the pilots, and one by one all of the planes, they would be jets, would be handed over to them, and that would be the time when they will be active within the Ukrainian Air Force. Number one. And number two, can we say that the immediate claims and immediate statements about F-16s, they are out just because that Russia and Ukraine, obviously world is seeking them both to sit down and have a dialogue over peace. And of course, in case they sit on the table for the dialogue, of course Ukraine wants to have a better position on the table, so that negotiations, they are not entirely against them, and somehow they can claim a ground.
Regarding the first question, please do tell us regarding platform integration also. It is important that they are getting F-16, but usually compared to the timeline that we are getting right now, how much time does it take usually for an Air Force to integrate F-16 into their squadron?
Good question.
Well, to answer the second question first, I mean, there's no set amount of time, but it's a matter of months. I mean, usually, I think that the Ukrainians have been operating on quite an expedited timeline when it comes to Western equipment. But, when we talk to the White House, they bring up a host of issues, from English language manuals to, of course, shipping and various things. Just the controls themselves, these are very different from the Soviet sort of doctrine aircraft that the Ukrainians are used to using. It doesn't mean that they won't be able to have proficiency on this, but it will take some time. So I think we're not still looking at the timeline of this current counteroffensive they're attempting to mount as being a viable time for these aircraft to come in, unless they are seriously rushed there. And that, of course, comes with its own consequences and risks. Now, when it comes to the actual negotiating position of Ukraine on the hypothetical negotiating table, the U.S. has said from the beginning that they want to strengthen Ukraine's position, but at the same time, they've set out the only kind of negotiations that the U.S. is willing to back is one where Russia is going to unconditionally withdraw from the country, which is just something that's not going to happen at this point, at least, or it seems, especially with this counteroffensive and the pace it's going, anytime in the near future. So we haven't yet seen any serious appetite on either side of the conflict to really enter to not even just a peace talks, but even a ceasefire. And unless we see that breakthrough, it's difficult to see how much the both sides, what their negotiating strength actually looks like, because I think that Ukraine certainly has shown that it's able to resist a full-on Russian attempt to take over the country, but that's about what we've seen so far. That's about it. They have not yet been able to get significantly further into the Donbass. They haven't been able to significantly get further into Crimea, for example. And I think we're really at risk here of some sort of very bloody stalemate that could take some time before we see serious peace efforts, even with a lack of progress on either side of the conflict.
Yeah, Tom, there is another very important aspects which is being highlighted, and of course it is being echoed, and it's quite amazing for me as well when I go through this kind of stuff. Number one, kamikaze drones. There are small drones who cost around $700 to $800, and that carry a small bomb. It straight away goes on one of the tanks, which is worth obviously millions of worth of tanks, which are being hit by them small drones. Of course, they are being handled by Ukraine. This is number one improvisation which we are seeing, and there is another one. In recent days we've been seeing that the airstrips and small air bases of Russian Air Force, they've been hit by drones from Ukrainian side. So can we say that these sort of innovation and innovative ideas which are being followed by Ukraine to disrupt the armored divs and to disrupt, of course, the infrastructure, the aerial infrastructure of Russian Air Force, it is quite interesting to see. And of course, these sort of things, they are giving a weight to Ukraine, and Ukraine has gained ground out of it.
Well, as far as gaining ground, it's a little inconclusive because they've certainly made some gains in the counteroffensive. That's indisputable. But we're not in a stage right now of this current operation to see any significant breakthroughs or major sort of gains. I think that many people expected, based on Ukraine's past performance, it's been very difficult for them to move across these very entrenched Russian positions. So when it comes to the idea of these loitering munitions, also known as kamikaze drones or suicide drones, I mean, I think it's hard to describe just how much they've changed the face of 21st century warfare. And I go back to the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan a few years ago, where we saw the use of Azerbaijani drones just decimate Armenian forces, which had a similar doctrine to that of the Russians and had decent equipment, and which many of it was Russian equipment, and it just proved unable to defend against this sort of threat. The Russians faced the exact same issue in their own offensive into Ukraine. It's something that they've struggled to overcome. I think that Russia otherwise has tried to employ their own sort of drone strategy, something that wasn't heavily introduced into the Russian military doctrine at the beginning of this conflict. And when it comes to the Ukrainian operations on the Russian side of the border, whether it's against buildings or against airstrips, I think that even more than a military character, they really are trying to get a psychological character to inflict damage on the Russian will to fight. And of course, the other side of that is that it risks galvanizing the Russian war effort. But I think that right now is a risk the Ukrainians have calculated that they're willing to make, because we haven't seen major breaks in the Russian support for this conflict at this time.
Tom, we can ooh and ah all we want regarding tactics and strategy here. But the question is that every war has its cost, right? Human cost and financial cost. And here, because both these countries are producing a lot of grain as well, so there is cost elsewhere as well. I wanted to ask this question, but I am told that we have to conclude the program here. Tom, thank you very much for being part of the program. Thank you very much for your precious time. Faisal, thank you very much for being part of the program as well. Viewers, you have listened to the discussion here. The most important thing right now is that we have to look at the cost of war, and we have to realize that while we keep on glorifying or like presenting war as something else, there are people who are dying, and there are people who might actually go hungry in sub-Saharan Africa as well. So we have to bear that in mind as well. This was today's program. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.